Today we're going to look at a tragic case of love under pressure. There's a saying that a broken vase can never be fully repaired, symbolizing how damage or betrayal can leave lasting scars. Even if a broken vase is pieced back together, the cracks are always visible, changing its look and purpose forever. This analogy is all too real for survivors of intimate exploitation. In the past, society often downplayed the pain of such experiences to avoid discomfort. However, our culture and legal systems have changed. Now those who have suffered are bravely sharing their stories and getting the support they need, driven by shocking incidents that can no longer be ignored. One such heartbreaking story is that of Antonia Bara from Chile. Her case brought the entire nation together to demand justice for her. The tragedy unfolded on the evening of October 13, 2019. Her family could never have imagined the devastating end to that day. Antonia's sister, Carla, had been visiting their parents' house. She went upstairs to say hello to Antonia, expecting a casual chat. Finding her seemingly asleep, Carla decided not to disturb her and was about to leave when Antonia suddenly asked about their mother and requested that the light be turned off. She then told Carla she loved her and turned away. Carla thought maybe Antonia was just tired or not in the mood to talk, unaware that her sister was struggling with deep, distressing thoughts and saw no way out. By 7 p.m., when their mother didn't get a response from Antonia's room, she walked into a horrifying scene. Antonia was motionless, hanging above the floor. Marcela, her mother, rushed to her but found no signs of life. Overwhelmed with shock, she called for help from neighbors. Friends of the family helped bring Antonia down and called emergency services. Shortly after, Antonia's father, Alejandro, spoke to the media, promising to uncover the reasons behind his daughter's tragic decision and to fight for justice. Antonia was known for her lively spirit and intelligence, making her loss even more devastating for those who knew her. It was clear that something had deeply affected Antonia. The autopsy confirmed that she had taken her own life through self-strangulation. Her death needed urgent attention, so her parents didn't wait for official investigations. Instead, they hired private detectives to piece together the last days of Antonia's life. Their efforts led them to a troubling discovery. Martin Pinas was the person who pushed Antonia to despair. Alejandro and Marcela quickly reported him to the police, suspecting him of exploitation. Little is known about Martin Pinas. He was born and raised in Temuco, Chile, the same city as Antonia. He came from a large family with parents, a sister, and a brother, but not much is known about his family dynamics. When he was younger, he had a child with a woman named Daniela Alvarez, but their relationship ended shortly after their child was born. The detectives found that Martin and Antonia had been communicating on social media between 2015 and 2017. At that time, Antonia was still a teenager. They exchanged messages and commented on each other's posts, keeping their interactions strictly online. But eventually they met in person, which sadly led to tragic consequences. Antonia was born in the late 1980s into a loving and tight-knit family. The Bara family lived in a large, spacious home, perfect for a family of their size. Her parents, Alejandro and Marcela, were devoted and caring, raising 5 children, 4 daughters and 1 son. It was a warm household where the children were well-mannered and didn't cause trouble. But even among her siblings, Antonia stood out. She was exceptionally perceptive, responsible, and ambitious from a young age, becoming a source of immense pride for her parents. She excelled academically, had good relationships with her teachers, and was full of dreams for her future. Antonia wanted to travel and live a meaningful life. After finishing high school, she got accepted into her dream university, choosing a highly competitive major. As a freshman, she dove into her studies, focused on mastering the basics of her chosen field. She also actively engaged in academic and social activities, quickly making new friends and embracing university life. Antonia's friends shared her interests and dreams, especially her close friend, Consuelo Uribe, who was studying law. They would often shop, go out, and attend parties together, growing very close over time. When Antonia went through a tough breakup with her boyfriend, Rodrigo, Consuela encouraged her to distract herself and move on. Eager to forget her heartbreak, Antonia took her friend's advice. They decided to celebrate Chile's Independence Day on September 18th with a trip to the tourist town of Pucón. Coincidentally, this was where Antonia and Martin crossed paths again. Martin was headed there for an electronic music festival at a popular club called Black Room, where a DJ friend of his was set to perform. On September 17th, at around 6:30 p.m., Antonia, Consuela, and 3 other friends, including Consuela's boyfriend, set off for Pucón. The journey went smoothly, and upon arrival, they stayed in separate accommodations. The girls stayed at a summer house owned by the Uribe family. After 8 p.m., the friends started getting ready for a night out at Black Room, a venue known for unforgettable parties. Before leaving, Antonia exchanged messages with her father, who reminded her to be careful around strangers. She reassured him, saying that being cautious was her strongest trait. Law enforcement officials interviewed Martin Penas multiple times, but he denied any wrongdoing related to Antonia. He claimed that their relationship was consensual and insisted he had nothing to do with her tragic end. However, detectives had their suspicions and evidence to suggest otherwise. The investigation revealed that Martin had left Temuco on September 17th around noon with a group of friends, planning to return the next day. Upon arriving in Pucón, they rented a house where they held a lively party filled with conversations, jokes, and alcohol. Meanwhile, Antonia and Consuela were getting ready to head to the club. Once there, they secured a table, ordered food and drinks, and enjoyed the evening by dancing and chatting. The Black Room became the unexpected setting for Antonia and Martin's reunion. This chance encounter was a surprise to both of them, and it seemed to lift their spirits, at least temporarily. Antonia and Martin spent the rest of the night at the club, talking and dancing together. It was clear that they enjoyed each other's company. Antonia occasionally left Martin's side to check on her friend Consuela, who was also having a good time, or to greet some male acquaintances she had traveled with. Moving between bars, she lost track of how much alcohol she was consuming, likely affected by the long drive and an empty stomach, something she normally would have avoided. Around 6:45 a.m., Consuela found Antonia chatting happily with a mutual acquaintance, Emilio. At that point, Consuela told her it was time to leave, but Antonia refused. She was in high spirits and wanted to keep the night going. Consuela urged her to stop drinking and reconsider, but Antonia was firm in her decision to stay while Consuela left. This choice would soon prove to be regrettable for Antonia. Emilio later became an unexpected witness to what happened next. He detailed his observations during the investigation and in court, noting that Martin approached Antonia, engaged her in conversation, and then took her by the hand, leading her towards the exit. Emilio noticed that Antonia seemed confused, possibly due to the alcohol, but she didn't resist being led away. He assumed that Martin had invited her to join him and that she had agreed. However, surveillance footage painted a different picture. Martin's friends later reported that they all left the club in 2 cars, but neither vehicle had space for Martin and Antonia. As a result, the two walked away on foot. Along the way, surveillance cameras caught them multiple times. They stopped at a store, where the footage revealed Martin coercing Antonia inside. She appeared unsteady, barely able to stand, and seemed unable to resist. Martin, who was less intoxicated, appeared to be in control of the situation. Throughout the night, the cameras captured Martin being overly affectionate, attempting to kiss Antonia, who did not reciprocate and even tried to pull away. Eventually, they reached the house Martin had rented with his friends. The group, still partying, paid little attention to the new arrivals. Only 19-year-old Barbara, who was a recent addition to the group and had not been drinking, noticed how intoxicated Antonia and Martin were when they arrived. Shortly after, Martin and Antonia went upstairs around 9 a.m. What happened next would be the focus of intense investigation, as it would later be linked to Antonia's tragic fate. Consuela received a voice message from Antonia, but at first she couldn't understand what was being said. After replaying it, she realized that Antonia was pleading for someone to pick her up. Unsure of her friend's exact location, Consuela used GPS to track it down. She and her boyfriend, Jose, hurried to the address provided. When they arrived at the house, they were greeted by a naked Martin, hastily covering himself with a pillow. Consuela urgently asked where Antonia was, but Martin claimed he had no idea. They quickly searched the house and found Antonia upstairs in one of the bedrooms. She was lying on a bed in her underwear, quietly crying. Jose gently picked her up and carried her to their car. Despite Consuela's attempts to find out what had happened, Antonia could only sob. unable to speak. Back at the summer house, Antonia broke down and revealed the horrifying truth: Martin had exploited her against her will. She felt utterly powerless to stop him. Her memories of the night were blurry, but one thing was clear: he had violated her. According to Antonia, this happened after they went upstairs together. Afterward, Martin had left her alone and disappeared. Jose and Consuela were shocked and immediately urged Antonia to report the incident to the police and seek justice. However, Antonia refused. She was terrified of her parents and the public finding out. The shame and fear of being judged made her decide to keep silent. She begged her friends not to tell anyone and said she would try to recover from the trauma on her own. During this emotional conversation, Antonia received a text from her father. He was checking in on her, jokingly asking if she had been drinking too much. Determined to hide her distress, she responded in her usual cheerful way, trying not to raise any suspicions. This effort to maintain a normal facade only highlighted her inner turmoil. The following day, Antonia met with Martin, hoping to talk about what happened. Instead of remorse, she was met with arrogance. Martin dismissed her accusations, insisting that everything between them had been consensual. At that moment, Antonia realized she would never get the truth from him or receive any apology. This cold response crushed any hope she had for closure. Antonia knew she had to find a way to move forward, but the pain was overwhelming. Later, during the court hearings, psychotherapists would testify that she was suffering from intimacy trauma syndrome. This condition disrupts physical, emotional, cognitive, and social behavior, often appearing immediately after a traumatic event or surfacing months or even years later. Antonia was enduring the acute phase of this trauma all by herself. She couldn't escape the distressing feelings: waves of anxiety, confusion, and moments of hysterical crying. She was plagued by a compulsive need to cleanse herself, often feeling nauseous or even vomiting. For 3 weeks, Antonia kept her suffering hidden, trying to go about her life as if nothing had happened. A childhood friend later admitted that she hadn't noticed anything unusual about Antonia's behavior. However, her university classmates noticed changes. They couldn't overlook her memory lapses, disorganization, and declining academic performance, unusual for someone who had always been a diligent student. When they asked if she was okay, she would simply blame poor health. During the trial, many witnesses came forward to defend Antonia, including friends, acquaintances, and classmates. They all tried to make sense of what had driven her to such a tragic end. What exactly was the turning point that led to her fateful decision? It's possible that, given time, Antonia might have sought professional help and healed, but a series of events pushed her over the edge. Somehow, her painful secret was leaked to an ex-boyfriend. However, the information he received was twisted and exaggerated, painting a very negative picture of her. When he confronted Antonia, she tried to explain that she was not at fault for what had happened, but Rodrigo didn't believe her. This betrayal deeply hurt her. To make matters worse, the day before her death, Martin called her. It's unclear what they talked about, but it's suspected that he may have made threats or pressured her in some way. The next day, Antonia was gone. Just a few hours before taking her life, she sent a farewell message to her current boyfriend. In a family group chat, she shared a childhood video of herself dancing and laughing, a bittersweet reminder of the joyful person she used to be. It was as if she was saying goodbye, not just to her loved ones, but also to the happy, carefree version of herself she could never return to. The trauma had stolen her ability to live, think, and act as she once did, leaving her feeling like there was no other way out. This tragedy left a profound impact on Chile, largely due to Antonia's father, Alejandro, who found the courage to share his daughter's heartbreaking story with the nation. Her tragic experience resonated deeply with the public, and soon her name was everywhere on posters, social media hashtags, and even spray painted on building walls. The outpouring of public support had an incredible effect. Within just a week, 6 more women came forward with similar accusations against Martin Penas, covering incidents from 2010 to 2019. It turned out that Martin was a serial offender, and he was swiftly taken into custody. However, as the case gained media attention, Martin's family became concerned for their own privacy. They claimed that their personal information had been leaked online, leading to a flood of insults, threatening messages, and false accusations. Citing their constitutional right to privacy, they filed a petition to protect their family's honor. On June 12, 2020, the court in Temuco granted their request, ruling that Antonia's family should refrain from sharing information about Martin's family on social media or making any public statements that could compromise them. This decision sparked outrage across the country, as many Chileans felt it was protecting Martin rather than supporting the victim. The backlash was swift. On July 21st, the Bara family appealed to the Supreme Court, but their appeal was rejected. To make matters worse, later that same month, Martin's lawyer filed for additional protective measures for his client. In an unexpected twist, the court changed Martin's detention to house arrest on July 22nd, effectively allowing him to go free. The judge clarified that this change did not mean he would escape punishment, but the public was not convinced. The prosecutor had initially charged Martin with 5 counts of assault, but the court only acknowledged 2 of them. This decision fueled massive protests across Chile. Outraged by the court's leniency and the dropping of certain charges, thousands took to the streets, demanding justice for Antonia and all victims of violence. The public outcry grew so intense that even the authorities took notice, and they sent an urgent request to the appeals court to reconsider the case. The judicial system responded quickly, aware that the entire nation was watching. The case, now known as the Antonia case, became a powerful symbol of the fight for justice and accountability. It empowered many other women to come forward with their own stories of abuse, no longer afraid to seek justice. The movement for change had begun, and the country was no longer willing to turn a blind eye to such injustices. The court ultimately overturned Martin's previous house arrest and ordered him back into custody. This same court also removed the statute of limitations for 2 cases involving intimate violence, ensuring that these offenses could be prosecuted regardless of how much time had passed. At the same time, Alejandro, Antonia's father, collaborated with feminist organizations to draft a new law aimed at punishing such crimes more severely. He emphasized that no one should remain passive when they see a woman being taken away by a man, especially if she's intoxicated. Alejandro stressed that these situations make women vulnerable to becoming victims, underscoring the need for legal and societal protections. The investigation into Martin continued, and in February 2021, the police discovered his phone. A forensic analysis uncovered disturbing photos where Martin proudly displayed women's underwear, seemingly keeping a record of his conquests. The police report eventually spanned nearly 400 pages, filled with statements from victims, witnesses, and acquaintances of both Martin and Antonia. Even a teacher from Martin's childhood described him as a smart and cheerful boy, yet disturbingly curious about intimate matters. Some women revealed that he had inappropriately touched them when they were children, but back then, it was dismissed as innocent behavior since they were all just kids. The criminal trial began on June 14, 2022, in Temuco, and was expected to last over a month. The prosecution presented a comprehensive body of evidence, including expert testimonies, witness statements, and video footage that clearly showed Antonia struggling to control the situation. On August 26th, Martin was found guilty and sentenced to 20 years in prison for crimes involving intimate assault and abuse. However, the case took another turn on December 29th, when the Supreme Court accepted an appeal from Martin's defense, challenging the verdict. This decision led to a new trial being scheduled for the spring of 2023. In the meantime, the relentless efforts of Antonia's family led to significant legislative changes. The initiative known as Antonia's Law began to take shape, aiming to strengthen existing laws so that anyone whose violent actions drive a victim to take their own life would face mandatory imprisonment. On March 16th, Martin's legal team abruptly resigned, leaving his defense in the hands of the Public Defender's Office. This change suggested that the upcoming retrial might take yet another unpredictable path, but the fight for justice was far from over, with Antonia's legacy continuing to inspire calls for greater protections for victims of violence. On April 24, 2024, Martin Prenis faced a second trial for 5 cases of violence and 2 cases of forced intimacy. During this trial, he chose not to stay silent and instead offered his version of events, claiming that his actions were driven by severe alcohol intoxication. The prosecutor, however, argued that by drinking with these women, he deliberately made them more vulnerable. On July 7, 2023, Prenis was found guilty, and the federal prosecution pushed for a 41-year prison sentence. By July 28, 2023, the court sentenced the 31-year-old to 17 years in prison for 7 offenses related to sexual violence against 6 victims. Considering the time he had already spent behind bars, his remaining sentence was reduced to 14 years. Antonia Bara's tragic story was instrumental in revealing the predatory behavior of Martin Prentice. It's uncertain how many more women might have fallen victim to his actions if not for her case. The thin line between flirtation and harassment is unpredictable, and crossing it can have devastating consequences. Antonia's case sparked societal change, transforming how victims of violence are perceived. Today, there is a broader awareness of the risks tied to unchecked impulses and lack of self-control, emphasizing that a person's body and soul are as delicate as crystal, valuable and deserving of respect. Thank you for watching. Make sure to subscribe to the channel for more gripping stories ahead.